Hey class, pop quiz. Why do we have seasons? If your answer was,
Well, because the Earth is closer to the sun during the summer.
you're incorrect. There is logic there, it's just not the right logic. In fact, when we have summer here in the northern hemisphere, our planet is slightly further away from the sun, but it doesn't really matter. What does matter is the angle at which we're facing the sun. But what would happen if there was no angle? All right, travelers, today we're talking about seasons, what they actually are, why they matter so much more than just for your weather, and how Zeer kind of takes the whole system, throws it out the window, and uses something else entirely. Let's get started. Earth is tilted. It leans at 23.5 degrees consistently as it orbits the sun, and it's the entire reason that we have seasons. We call this lean axial tilt. As Earth moves around the sun, first one hemisphere and then the other angles directly towards it. A more direct angle means more concentrated energy per square meter of surface area. More concentrated energy means warmth, and that's our summer. Meanwhile, on the other hemisphere, the light is hitting the planet at a shallower angle. So it's kind of spreading out more, and that's what ends up giving us our cooler winter. And yes, while Earth does have an elliptical orbit when we're closer to the sun for part of the year, the distance is pretty negligible when it actually comes to the amount of energy that the planet is receiving. The important part is that angle. Is it direct or is it shallow? This single geometric fact, Earth's axial tilt, cascades into literally every other facet of life here on planet Earth. You might be thinking,
Come on, seasons can't be all that important.
but in fact, they are. They're so much more than just temperature differentials and swings. Seasons are the foundational clock that influences all biological and cultural life. Ecologically, seasons create pulses. With plants, it's the cycle of blooming, growing, ripening, harvesting, and going dormant again. This also syncs up with animals and their birthing periods, their migrations, their feeding, their hibernation. Even if you don't live in one of the more extreme latitudes, north or south, and you live closer to the equator, there are still seasonal rhythms to plant and animal life that affect your life. Think about the way that all of this cascades. You have predators that are timing their birthing cycles to that of their prey to make sure there's sufficient food for them and their offspring. You have insects that don't emerge until the flowers start to bloom. The entire system is synchronized with each layer timing itself to the layer below it, all because of axial tilt. Culturally, seasons are the original calendar. Before atomic clocks and GPS satellites, we had the consistent rhythm of the years. Every agricultural civilization on Earth has timed itself around planting season, harvest season, winter, even things like marriages, tax collection, sacred days. It was all synced up to the seasonal rhythms. The equinoxes and the solstices became the most spiritually charged moments in all of human history precisely because of how environmentally significant they were. And mythologically, seasons are amongst the oldest stories that we have as humans. Persephone going to the underworld, and when she returns, spring comes. Or Osiris, his death and resurrection being tied to the seasonal flooding of the Nile. Seasons gave early humans not just a calendar, but also a narrative. Earth's cycles of death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life, over and over again, reliably for millennia. Strip away axial tilt, and all of that goes along with it. We might not even value the life, death, rebirth cycle nearly as much as we do if it weren't for our early ancestors having this narrative that was always formed around seasons. Now let's talk about Zeer. Here you have Zeer orbiting its little orange dwarf in a nearly circular pattern at a perfect upright angle. No axial tilt. So no seasons, right? There would be no solstices, no equinoxes. The sun would rise and set at virtually the exact same place in the sky all the time, every day, every year. And if by some chance you were an Earthling to visit Zeer and you were waiting around for Earth-like seasons to happen, you're going to be waiting a very long time and you're going to be very disappointed. Now, before you panic, Zeer does have seasons. They just don't come from axial tilt and they work slightly differently. Okay, they work a lot differently, but they look very similar. Now, if you were building a world without axial tilt, you could just hand wave some seasons into existence. That is perfectly fine. That is an option that you can use. That is not the route that I went with Zeer. However, and this is important, this is one of the foundational places in Zeer's deep architecture where I have very intentionally stepped away from the science adjacent process, which isn't entirely true. Let's just say I added some extra physics. For review, Zeer exists in a hexaverse. It's kind of like a pocket universe and a multiverse had a baby, and there were 6 very compartmentalized faces to it. So it's the same universe, physically and dimensionally connected to each other, but it's not infinite variety like a multiverse would be. Each of those 6 versions of itself is aligned with one of the 6 primary arcane elements: dark, earth, water, air, fire, and light. The 6 primary elements represent the primordial forces of which everything in this particular hexaverse's reality is made up of. All 6 energies exist within each of the planes, but one energy dominates each copy. And stars in this hexaverse are a little bit funny. They don't just emit light and heat. They also emit these energetic frequencies. Think of it as an oscillation. Each star is increasing and decreasing in its frequency, and as it does so, it passes through these different bandwidths of elemental dominance. Each bandwidth that is associated with a specific element lasts for about 101 Zeer days. Now, this is specific to Zeer's star. Other stars might have a different oscillation. It takes approximately 1010 Zeer days to pass through the entire cycle. And what this does is it gives Zeer 10 energetic seasons. At the bottom of the oscillation, we have the dark season. It starts to ascend through ascending earth, ascending water, ascending air, ascending fire until it gets to light. And then it starts to descend in its frequency through fire, air, water, earth until it gets back to dark. During those seasons, regardless of which plane you're on, the energies associated with that element are stronger. Now, you can think about this cycle similar to an Earth winter cycle. It isn't as dramatic as it is here on Earth. There isn't as much of a difference between the temperatures during summer and winter. And also, it affects the entire planet at once. It isn't half of the planet experiencing winter while the other half experiences summer. You would get some different vibes during different parts of the year. So even though there's an ascending water and a descending water, ascending water would feel more like the rains of spring, whereas descending water would feel more like the rains of autumn. Both are very wet seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere where I live, but they have a very different feel based on like other things that are happening in nature. In my last video, I established that Zeer has a solar year of 119 days, but there's no axial tilt. It doesn't sync up with the solar year. Instead, the seasons are 101 days long. That's almost as long as the solar year, but it takes 10 of those seasons, which works out to about 8.5 solar years, for the planet to actually experience a full cycle of change. And because of this, most of Zeer's cultures do not track solar time. They track the Great Year. The Great Year is the full 10-season cycle that the planet goes through. So even though Zeer's solar year is much shorter than our Earth solar year, its actual seasonal variation is slower than Earth's seasonal variation. So Zeer's cultural rhythms are much more synced up to the sun's heartbeat than the planet's heartbeat. They also wouldn't have ceremonies celebrating things like solstices and equinoxes the way that we do here on Earth. So, yes, I do admit that this is a moment where I was like, I need a little bit of hand waving. But then I went back to the science adjacent process and I created a strategic reasoning for how this hand waving would work. So, even though Zeer doesn't have axial tilt, it still does have some type of grounding in the passage of time, just a different one. If you were to visit another planet within the hexaverse, one that does have axial tilt, and its star is also doing the pulsing through the energetic system, you would have some really interesting and crazy effects going on in terms of their seasons. So, what about your world? Does it have axial tilt, or is something else driving the mechanism of the seasons? Or are there no seasons? And what does life look like for the people living there? I would love to hear what ideas you're developing around this concept, so please drop them in the comments so we can have a conversation about it. That's it for today, folks. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe, and if you'd like to support my work, you can head on over to Substack at www.worldofzeer.com. As a paid member, you'll get access to more Zeer world lore articles, some behind-the-scenes musing, and early drafts as I get them finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.